Auschwitz. The origins of the camp can be dated to early 1940, when the SS sent a commission to the Polish town of Auschwitz to determine whether a set of barracks that had been constructed outside the town during World War I, and that between the wars had been used by the Polish military, could be used as a concentration camp. Although the initial report was negative, a later inspection determined that the change of use would be possible after some construction works. Another commission, headed by SS Hauptführer Rudolf Haupt, visited Auschwitz on 18th-19th April 1940. Haupt's report seemed to have carried the most weight, for on 27 April 1940, Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler ordered the establishment of a concentration camp in Auschwitz, and on 4th May appointed Rudolf Haupt as its commandant. The national origins of Auschwitz victims. Auschwitz was originally intended to serve as a concentration camp and a place of slow death for Polish political prisoners and other Poles. In later years, it gradually became the main center for the systematic murder of those the Nazis considered human vermin, namely Jews and Roma. The Nazis' pseudoscientific theories on the superiority of the Aryan race condemned more than 1 million people to die in this place alone. The first prisoners to be sent to Auschwitz, a group of 728 Polish political prisoners, including some Jews, arrived in Auschwitz from Tarnow on 14 June 1940. The first large group sent to Auschwitz from outside Poland was a transport of Czechs. This was in June 1941. Soviet prisoners of war started arriving a month later, immediately after the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union, and groups from Yugoslavia in September 1941, initially men, but by July 1942, women as well. Among the latter were uniformed women partisans who demanded to be treated as prisoners of war and refused to have their heads shaved. Within a few months of the Wannsee Conference in January 1942, where the method by which the Jews of Europe were to be murdered was discussed and agreed, final solution of the Jewish question, Auschwitz became one of the main camps to which Jews were to be sent for extermination. The first known transport, composed entirely of Jews, arrived the very next month, and such transports continued to arrive from all over occupied Europe until November 1944. In September 1942, Rudolf Haupt visited Treblinka and Kemmlo to witness the gassing operations, as these differed from those at Auschwitz. In his memoirs, Haupt stated that the methods used at Treblinka and Kemmlo were primitive, and in his opinion inferior to those of his own camp. In 1943, the Nazis started to murder Romani at Auschwitz, brought there for this purpose initially from occupied Poland, starting in February 1943, and later from other countries, primarily the Reich in Bohemia and Moravia. The Auschwitz Complex. Expanding Auschwitz capacity, both to murder Jews and to assist in the Nazis' war effort through the use of slave labor, was of paramount importance. In 1940, Auschwitz had 20 buildings. By 1942, there were 28 buildings, all of which had 2 stories. Work commenced in 1942 on the building Auschwitz-Birkenau, which could accommodate 200,000 people. Birkenau is 2 miles away from Auschwitz I. An additional satellite camp, Auschwitz III, the first of a series of forced labor camps, was opened as a part of the construction of a massive synthetic oil and rubber factory known as Buna Monowitz. Thus, the 3 main Auschwitz camp became one huge extermination complex, eventually to encompass not only gas chambers and the camps themselves, but also 45 subcamps, factories, and mines in Upper Silesia and the Sudetenland. Arrival at Auschwitz. People were transported to Auschwitz-Birkenau by trains from all over Nazi-occupied Europe. They were generally sent in freight cars or cattle trucks. Often they traveled for days without toilet facilities and with nothing to eat or drink. Originally, the railway cars arrived at the old ramp of Birkenau, 1 kilometer southeast of the entrance gate. From May 1944, they continued into Auschwitz II, Birkenau itself, along a specially constructed spur. The majority of the people sent in these transports were murdered in gas chambers directly on arrival. Their names never appeared in the camp records, so that it is very difficult to determine precisely how many perished from these transports. Those the SS deemed fit for work were not murdered immediately, but were used as slave laborers. They were given striped prison clothing and a prisoner number. From 1943, most prisoners, though never Germans unless they were Jewish, were tattooed with their numbers, generally on their left forearm. In all, more than 400,000 people, members of a national and ethnic groups, were allocated numbers. Of these, about one-half died. Few lived longer than 6 months. They died from starvation, disease, the rigors of hard labor, beatings, torture, and summary execution, by shooting, hanging, or gassing. Conditions in Auschwitz. Prisoners in Auschwitz I were initially housed in one-story brick barracks, formerly used by the Polish army for stabling horses. When the number of inmates increased, a second story was added to each barrack. At first, the prisoners slept on the floor. Later, 2- and 3-tier bunk beds were installed. Auschwitz I was a concentration camp with a regimen similar to other camps of that kind. Amongst their privileges, the inmates were allowed to use the camp's postal service. Auschwitz II, Birkenau, was a hybrid. Principally an extermination camp, it also served as a concentration camp. Here the prisoners were housed in wooden or brick huts. The wooden huts were based on the design for SS stables, and as many as 800 prisoners were sometimes crowded into a space designed for 52 horses. Lavatories were extremely primitive and few in number. Prisoners had very limited time to relieve themselves. Washing facilities were likewise grossly insufficient. Work meant slave labor in factories, mines, farming operations,